3 days after my daughter came into this world, my mother stood in my hospital room and told a room full of people that the baby wasn't ours. Not a whisper, not a private pull aside. Loud, deliberate. The kind of loud that's designed to wound in front of witnesses. Sharon Gregory. Pearls gleaming at her throat. Posture so straight you'd think she had a rod welded to her spine. Looked down at my daughter like she was examining a suspicious receipt. Turned to the assembled Gregorys and said, "Clear, Isabel. This baby can't be our blood. Welcome to Real's Dad Truth." Before we continue with today's story, please take a moment to support us by giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us and gives us the motivation to bring you more powerful and emotional stories every single day. We would also love to hear your thoughts. Please share your feelings, opinions, or reactions in the comments below, and don't forget to include the hashtag #RealsDadTruth. Thank you so much for being here, for listening, and for becoming a part of our story-loving community. My brother Nolan went completely still. My other brother, Damien, looked at the floor. My sister-in-law, Melissa, Damon's wife, God bless her, actually took a step backward like she needed distance from what had just been said. And Inace's cousin Clara, who'd driven 4 hours to be here, slowly set down the balloon bouquet she brought. Me? I just smiled, which, if I'm being honest, probably made it worse. Sharon Gregory did not expect a smile. She expected tears, denials, maybe a scene, something she could manage from a height. What she didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that I'd already put something in motion, a test, an independent, accredited, airtight DNA panel that a very thorough doctor was going to walk through that door with in about 10 days. I didn't know exactly what it was going to say, but I had a pretty strong suspicion, and my wife had spent 12 years learning to read what blood actually tells you. My name is Ian Gregory, 38 years old, product manager by trade, obsessive reader of human behavior by necessity, and apparently a man who can smile through a sucker punch while standing next to a hospital bassinet. Let me back up. Annalise and I met at a work conference in Denver 7 years ago. She was presenting on supply chain analytics. I was pretending to understand supply chain analytics while eating a hotel pretzel. She walked past my table, made a comment about how the pretzels were the only honest thing at the whole conference, and I was done, gone, absolutely cooked from that moment forward. We got married 2 years later in a small ceremony that her family loved and mine tolerated. And I say tolerated because the Gregorys, Sharon's Gregorys, have a very particular definition of what a Gregory wedding should look like. It involves a country club, 300 guests, and a bride whose family has at least one senator in the lineage. Annalise's father drives a postal truck in Akron. Her mother works at a dental office. They are the warmest, funniest, most genuinely decent people I have ever met in my life, and they will never once be Sharon Gregory considers appropriate. I knew this going in. I thought love would smooth it over. I thought our daughter would change things. I was wrong on both counts, but the second one stung in ways I'm still processing. Sharon has been measuring Annalise since the first dinner I brought her home. I watched it happen in real time and told myself it was nothing. The slight pause after Annalise mentioned where she went to college. The way Sharon complimented her earrings in a tone that somehow also managed to be a question about her taste. The famous story of the Gregory pearls, 4 generations old, passed from mother to daughter-in-law, but only to blood Gregorys, which Sharon told directly to Annalise while looking pointedly at her neck. Annalise smiled through all of it. That's her weapon, the smile. I filed it under difficult mother-in-law and moved on with my life, which in hindsight was a spectacular failure of situational awareness on my part. My father, Nolan, Sr., passed away 2 years before our daughter was born. Heart attack. 63 years old, a man who worked himself into an early grave because Sharon needed a certain house in a certain neighborhood and a certain car in the driveway. After he died, Sharon became the sole keeper of the Gregory name, the Gregory legacy, the Gregory standards, and she guarded all of it with the energy of a woman who had always been told she wasn't quite enough and had decided to make everyone around her feel the same way. That I would later understand was the important detail I kept filing away and never examining closely enough. There was one other thing I'd filed away. A small comment Sharon had made to Nolan at Thanksgiving a couple of years back, flipping through old family photos. She'd pointed at a picture of me, maybe 9 or 10 years old, and frowned slightly. "Ian never did favor your father much, did he?" I happened to be in the kitchen doorway when she said it, and I remember thinking it was an odd thing to say. But I was holding a beer and a plate of turkey, and I let it go. The way you let odd things go at Thanksgiving, because the alternative is a scene, and nobody wants a scene at Thanksgiving. I didn't know it yet, but Annalise had heard it too. Our daughter, we named her Lily, was born on a Thursday morning at 3:12 a.m. after 16 hours of labor that I will never for as long as I live complain about anything in comparison to. Annalise was a warrior. She squeezed my hand hard enough to restructure my knuckles. And when they placed Lily on her chest, 6 pounds 9 this tiny, screaming, furious person, I cried before she did, which Annalise will bring up at every opportunity for the rest of our lives. And she has earned that. 4 hours after Lily arrived, the Gregory family descended. Sharon first, then Damien and Melissa, then Nolan, who'd flown in from Houston. Then Sharon's sister Patty, who is the one Gregory I've always actually liked, moving quietly in the background, like a woman who has learned to witness things without becoming part of them. Sharon took Lily from the bassinet without asking. She held her at arm's length, the way you'd examine something you're not entirely sure you want to touch, turning her slightly in the fluorescent light, and then to the room. She's dark. Gregory, babies are fair. Always have been. She does have a lot of hair for a newborn. My family has dark hair, Annalise said from the bed, hooked to an IV, still wearing a hospital gown, 10 hours removed from one of the most physically brutal experiences a human being can have. Recessive traits don't work in straight lines. I can draw you a Punnett square if that would help. Nobody laughed. Sharon placed Lily back in the bassinet like she was returning library material. We'll see, she said. 2 words. Flat, practiced, a door closing without a slam. I stood there and said nothing, and I need to sit with that for a second because it matters. I watched my wife, postpartum, exhausted, still shaking slightly from the epidural wearing off, defend herself to my mother in a hospital room, and I stood there holding a terrible vending machine coffee and said absolutely nothing. That's on me fully, completely 100% on me. I told myself Sharon was just being Sharon. I told myself Inez was tough. She is tough and she could handle it. I told myself it would blow over. I didn't know it yet, but what I actually did was leave my wife alone on a battlefield I should have walked out onto beside her. The texts started 2 days after we brought Lily home. They came through my phone, which was Sharon's preferred method of triangulated warfare. She never attacked Annalise directly. That would be too honest, too confrontational, too something she'd have to own. Instead, she sent things to me that were really about Annalise. The way you throw to first base when the real play is at second. Just checking in, sweetheart. New babies can be fussy when the environment feels unsettled. Then an hour later, I was talking to Patty and she mentioned something about genetics. Did you know features can skip generations or sometimes come from somewhere unexpected? Ha ha. My 61-year-old mother ended her insinuation with, ha. I showed the text to Annalise because I thought she'd find them absurd. She didn't find them absurd. She read them twice, set my phone down on the kitchen counter with a careful click, and said very quietly, "She's not going to stop. She'll get bored," I said. "Once she actually bonds with Lily, I am." She looked at me steadily. "She's not going to stop. And you need to decide what you're going to do about that because I'm done pretending it's nothing." She was right. I still didn't do anything. I know. 3 days after we brought Lily home, Sharon came by the house. I wasn't there. I'd run to the pharmacy for more diapers, which I now understand was cosmically terrible timing. And I came back to find my wife sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold and a look on her face I can only describe as resolved, like she'd made a decision while I was gone. Sharon had apparently sat across from her for 40 minutes, held Lily. And this is the part I can't think about without my jaw tightening, looked at my daughter and said, "She really doesn't look like Ian. Not at all." "She looks like me," Inez said. "Yes," Sharon had apparently smiled. "That's what I mean." And then she left like she hadn't just dropped a grenade on her way out the door. When Annalise told me this, I finally called my mother. "Mom, you can't say things like that." "I didn't say anything. I just made an observation." "You implied that, Inez." "I implied nothing. I said the baby doesn't look like you." "That's a fact. It's not an accusation. It absolutely is an accusation, Mom. And you know it. Silence on the line. The silence of a woman who has decided she's the wronged party in this conversation. I just think she said finally that a DNA test would put everyone's mind at ease, including yours. My mind is at ease. Well, the word landed like a thumbtack. That's very trusting of you. I didn't know it yet, but that was actually going to be the most accurate thing she said during this entire disaster. Just not in the way she meant it. Here's something I haven't told many people. When I brought the DNA idea to Annalise, because yes, after that phone call, some buried reptile part of my brain had started whispering things I am deeply ashamed to admit. She didn't get angry. She didn't cry. She looked at me for a long moment and said, "Okay, I'll do the test, Ian. Not because I have anything to prove to you or to her, but because once it comes back, I want it on paper. I want something I can hold up." She walked to the nursery, lifted Lily out of the crib, and didn't look at me for the rest of the afternoon. That night, I lay awake next to my sleeping wife and felt the particular shame of a man who has failed his family twice in the same week and is only now beginning to understand the scope of it. I stared at the ceiling and counted things. The lines in the drywall, the rotations of the ceiling fan, the soft sounds of Lily breathing through the monitor on the nightstand. I didn't know it yet, but the test Annalise had already set in motion independently through her own professional contacts without telling me the full scope of it was going to answer a question nobody in the Gregory family had thought to ask. Not about Lily, about me. 2 more weeks passed. Sharon escalated. She called Nolan to voice her concerns. Nolan, to his credit, told her to knock it off and then called me to give me a heads up, which I appreciated. She called Patty, who refused to engage, and called Annalise directly to apologize. She mentioned it to Damien, who mentioned it to Melissa, who texted me a string of question marks that I didn't know how to respond to. The Gregory family, in the way of all families who lack the courage to address a thing directly, began having a conversation about us without us. You could feel it in the texts that arrived a day too late. The group chat that went suspiciously quiet, the sense of everyone quietly picking a lane, and then Sharon called and asked me to come over alone. I went. I shouldn't have, but I went. She met me at the door in the pearls. Naturally, led me to the formal living room, not the kitchen, the living room, which in Sharon Gregory's house is where serious things happen, where the good china comes out and posture improves. She had tea waiting. "I need you to understand," she said, settling into her chair, "that I am saying this out of love for you, for the Gregory name, for what your father built. But Ian, you are a Gregory. This family has a history, a legacy. My daughter's name is Lily, and she is a Gregory. I said she is Annalise's daughter, and she is mine. If you can't accept that without a test result, then I want the test result." She was very calm. "I want to be able to look at my granddaughter and know for certain. You already know. I want it in writing." She looked at me with the same expression she'd had in that hospital room. Not cruel exactly, just certain. Like she had already decided what the truth was and was merely waiting for the paperwork to confirm it. "Fine," I said. I drove home and told Annalise that Sharon wanted us to move forward with the test officially as a family matter. Annalise was quiet for a moment. Then, good. Just that, good. I didn't know it yet, but the way she said that one word should have told me everything. The doctor's name was Anderson Peters, a colleague of Annalise at Ridgemont Medical. He had the energy of a man who has seen enough of the world to not be surprised by it, which turned out to be exactly the right disposition for what he was about to walk into. Annalise had requested a comprehensive panel, not just paternity. She'd ordered a grandparentage test as well. I didn't ask why at the time. I figured she was being thorough, which she is, but I'd learned later that it was because of something she'd quietly held onto for over a year. Sharon's throwaway comment at Thanksgiving. "Ian never did favor your father much, did he?" Annalise had filed that away. She reads what the data is actually saying, and she doesn't discard an anomaly just because it's inconvenient. That's her whole job, reading the thing nobody wants to read. Sharon had convened the family for the results. Of course, she had. She'd assembled the full Gregory apparatus. Nolan, Damien, and Melissa, Patty, and 2 uncles whose names I always mix up in the hospital's family consultation room. The one with the round table and the tissue box in the center that nobody ever reaches for until suddenly everyone does. She'd staged it like a verdict. I sat beside Annalise. Lily was in the carrier between my feet, asleep, doing the thing she does where she frowns slightly, even in sleep, like she's working through a complex problem. Clara had driven up to sit with Lily in the waiting area so we could have the room. Nobody spoke. The fluorescent lights hummed. Dr. Peters walked in at 2:15 p.m. He set the folder on the table, looked around the room, and took a seat. "There are a couple of findings here," he said. "I want to walk through all of them before anyone responds." She was almost smiling. The expression of a woman who believes the next 30 seconds are going to vindicate her entirely. "The paternity test," Dr. Peters said, "confirms that Ian Gregory is Lily's biological father." I let out a breath I hadn't fully realized I'd been holding for 2 weeks. Sharon's expression didn't change. She was waiting for the other shoe. She was certain there wasn't one. "The grandparentage test," Dr. Peters continued, "was less straightforward." The room shifted. Something atmospheric changed, like pressure dropping before a storm. "The analysis of Sharon Gregory's DNA relative to Lily shows." He checked his notes. Nolan's head came up. Damon said, "I'm sorry. What? That's impossible," Sharon said. Her voice was still controlled, but something had fractured behind her eyes. "Run it again." The test was run twice through an independent AB-accredited laboratory. The chain of custody was maintained throughout. "The results are not in dispute." Dr. Peters looked at Sharon directly. "Mrs. Gregory, there are several possible explanations for this finding, and I want to be clear that the most likely one is not what you might assume." He looked at Annalise. She took it from there. "The test confirms Lily is Ian's biological daughter," she said, not looking at Sharon, looking at me, which means I was faithful. "There was no affair. There was never an affair." She let every single person at that table absorb it fully. But the grandparentage results also show that Sharon is not biologically related to Ian. The silence changed again. It wasn't anticipation anymore. It was the sound of something giving way. "There are several possible explanations," Annalise continued, her voice as steady as if she were presenting findings at a conference. "Based on Ian's birth records at Grayson County General, a small rural hospital in 1986 before standardized newborn identification banding was widely implemented. The findings are consistent with a hospital-level identification error. 2 babies, 2 families, a mix-up that nobody caught because nobody thought to look." She paused. "Dr. Peters has already filed a records request with the hospital's regional archive. We'll know more in the coming weeks." She looked at Sharon. "You were right, Sharon. Lily isn't your blood. Neither is he. I want to tell you Sharon fell apart right then. I want to tell you it was loud and dramatic. It wasn't. Not at first." She stood up fast enough that her chair scraped the wall behind her. She said the lab was wrong. She said Annalise had tampered with the results. "You work at this hospital. You could have done anything." And her voice had gone high and jagged, and nothing like the woman who'd sat across from me with good china 2 weeks earlier. Drive Peters held his ground. Annalise held her ground. She'd been holding her ground for 3 years in this family. 2 more minutes was nothing. Nolan sat with his hands flat on the table, very still. Damon was staring at the far wall like it owed him an explanation. "Ian." Sharon turned to me and her eyes were wet now. "And I want to be honest. Seeing my mother cry has never been something I handle cleanly. Tell them. Tell them I'm your mother." "You are my mother," I said, and I meant every word of it. "You raised me. I'm not arguing with that." "Then tell her to throw those results in the trash." "I can't do that, Mom." My voice came out steadier than I felt because they're true. Melissa had gone pale, her arms hanging at her sides like someone had switched off the current. Nolan was looking at me with an expression. I couldn't fully read something between grief and a kind of exhausted recognition. Like a man who has just been handed the answer to a question he never knew he had. Patty sat quietly in the corner and watched Sharon the way she'd been watching Sharon my whole life. Like a woman who has always known something she was never asked to say out loud. Sharon looked around the room she had assembled, the audience she had gathered, the stage she had set for my wife's humiliation, and she watched every light in it turn to face her. Instead, she sat back down. Not dramatically, just slowly the way a person sits when their legs make the decision for them. The pearls rose and fell with her breathing. "When I married your father," she said, almost to herself, not to the room, to the table. "His mother told me I wasn't good enough, that I came from nothing, that the Gregory name would carry me, and I should be grateful every single day." Nobody spoke. I spent 40 years proving her wrong. I kept the house. I kept the name. I kept the legacy. Her hands found the pearls. "And now you're telling me the son I built it all around isn't even." She stopped. I moved to her without thinking about it. I knelt beside her chair the way you kneel beside someone who's fallen. Mom, just for a second. One unguarded, unmanaged second, I saw something in her face I'd never seen before. Something young and frightened and genuinely lost. The woman behind the performance. Then it closed, her jaw tightened. She reached up, unclasped the pearls, and placed them on the table with a quiet final click. "This is your fault," she said to Annalise, past rage now into something colder and harder. "You did this to my family." I answered the question you asked. Annalise said quiet, immovable. "And the question you should have asked a long time ago." Sharon stood. She walked past me without touching me. Past Noland, past Damien, past Patty, past all of it. Out the door, which she closed with a soft, precise click. No slam, just gone. The pearls sat on the table under the fluorescent light, belonging to no one. The room emptied the way air leaves when you open a window, gradual and inevitable. Nolan was last to go. He stopped beside me, put his hand on my shoulder, and held it there for a moment without saying anything. Then, "You, okay?" "Ask me in a month," I said. He nodded, squeezed once, left. Melissa hugged Annalise at the door, held on longer than I expected, and I heard her say I should have said something sooner. And Annalise say you're saying it now in a way that put it to rest without any bitterness. Patty stopped by Annalise's chair on the way out. "I'm sorry," she said for all of it. "Not yours to carry," Annalise said. "I know. I'm sorry anyway, doctor." Peters left the folder on the table and excused himself with the professional restraint of a man who has watched families absorb the unbearable and has learned to give them space to do it. He squeezed Annalise's shoulder on the way out. Then it was just us, Annalise and me, and Lily's carrier between my feet, and the pearls on the table, and the specific quiet of a room where something large has just ended. I looked at those pearls. 4 generations, blood Gregory's only, the whole story Sharon had built her life around. I thought about a small hospital in 1986. 2 babies, 2 families, a mistake nobody made on purpose and nobody caught for nearly 40 years. I thought about a woman who spent 4 decades guarding a legacy she never actually had full access to, and who became in doing so the exact thing that had once been done to her. And I thought about my wife who 3 days after giving birth had smiled at a woman trying to unmake her, because she'd already seen the data. She'd already done the math. "She'll call," I said eventually. "It won't be an apology." "No, probably not. That's okay." I looked at her for a long moment. I should have said something in the hospital that first day when she said what she said, and I just stood there. "Yeah," she said, not unkindly, just honestly. "You should have. I'm sorry." She reached across the table and took my hand. "I know you are." We sat there a while. Lily slept. The pearls caught the light. Outside the window, the afternoon was doing something ordinary and indifferent with clouds, which felt about right. In the weeks that followed, things settled into the shape of a new kind of normal. Sharon didn't call. Patty reported she'd largely retreated, refusing most visitors. Nolan drove down to check on her twice and reported back in the careful, diplomatic way of a middle sibling trying not to take sides in a war that was already over. Damon sent me one text. "Take your time." 3 words. I read it probably 6 times. Melissa texted Annalise every few days. Nothing heavy, just check-ins, memes, a photo of Lily and Melissa making matching unimpressed faces during a visit that I saved immediately and will be showing at every future family gathering for the rest of my natural life. Dr. Peters filed the formal records request with Grayson County General, or what remained of it after it was absorbed into a regional health system in 2003. The archived records were incomplete and would take months to piece together. Somewhere out there, a person roughly my age had grown up in a different family with a different name, never knowing the Gregorys existed. And I, who had always felt in some dim and unexamined way like a guest in a house where everyone else knew the floor plan, finally understood why that feeling had always been there. 6 weeks after the meeting, I drove to my mother's house alone. She answered the door and the pearls, which I had to respect, honestly. Whatever else Sharon Gregory is, she is committed to the bit. We sat in the kitchen, not the formal living room, which felt significant, and drank bad coffee, and talked around most of what needed to be talked about because neither of us was quite there yet. But we talked. She asked about Lily. I told her Lily had recently discovered she could grab things and was deploying this ability with absolutely zero restraint or judgment. Sharon's mouth did something involuntary at that, not a smile exactly the shape of one. I was wrong, she said eventually into her coffee. Not to me, just to the air in front of her. I know I was wrong about Inez. I know that, too. A long pause. I don't know what you do with something like this, she said. I don't know how to. She stopped. Started again. I built everything around a story. And now the story. I know, Mom. I don't know how to fix it. I think I said you start by saying what you just said to me to her. Not to the coffee. To her. She didn't answer that, but she looked up at me, and for just a second, she was the woman I'd seen in that consultation room before she shut the door on it. Uncertain, real. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not for a while. But it was the first honest thing we'd said to each other in years. I drove home. Lily was awake when I got there in Annalise's arms in the kitchen, grabbing at the air with her whole fist like she was trying to catch something invisible. I stood in the doorway and watched them for a moment before they saw me, my wife making faces, my daughter staring back at her with the profound seriousness of a person who finds the world extremely confusing and entirely worth figuring out. How'd it go? Annalise asked. She's not ready, but she's not as certain as she was either. That's something. Yeah, I said. That's something. I stood there a while holding it, thinking about 4 generations and blood and legacy, and what any of those things actually mean when you remove the story someone constructed around them. I put the box on the top shelf, not thrown away, not kept close, just set aside. The way you set aside something once you've already answered the question it was asking. Here's what I know now that I didn't know 3 days after Lily was born. Blood tells you where you came from. It has never once told anyone where they belong. Sharon Gregory spent 40 years building an identity around a bloodline that wasn't hers. And in doing so, she became exactly the woman who had once told her she wasn't enough. She built walls around a name she thought would protect her, and never noticed she'd trapped herself inside them. And Annalise, my wife, who put herself through school on waitressing tips and late-night lab shifts, who walked into this family with nothing but her intelligence and her patience and her absolute refusal to be made small. Annalise saw all of it. She saw it in a throwaway comment at Thanksgiving. She saw it in the data. She saw it in Sharon's face. And she waited because she's the kind of person who doesn't need the last word, just the right moment. I'm going to spend the rest of my life learning things from her. Lily is 6 months old. She has Annalise's dark hair, and according to my father-in-law, my exact expression when I'm confused about something, a description Annalise found far too funny for far too long. She is the most stubborn, most curious, most thoroughly determined person I have ever shared an address with, and she has not even started walking yet. God help us all when she does. She is a Gregory. She is also, more importantly, exactly herself. And no one, not a pearl-wearing woman with a grudge and a bloodline obsession, not a rural hospital sloppy record-keeping from 1986, not a DNA test or the absence of one is ever going to tell her otherwise. Not while I'm standing next to her. I should have been standing next to her mother from the beginning. I know that. Annalise knows that. We've talked about it in the honest, uncomfortable way that married people talk about the things they need to actually say. But I'm here now. And that part who you stand next to, who you defend, who you refuse to leave alone in a room with someone trying to make them smaller, that part you choose. Every single day you choose it. To every partner reading this, stand next to your person, not behind. Not 3 steps back, holding a vending machine coffee, waiting to see how it plays out. Next to them from the start. That's the whole thing.